Chapter 1. The Move. Carmen Winstead sat in the back seat of the family car, her heart heavy with the weight of leaving her old life behind. The familiar streets of her hometown were replaced by the unfamiliar roads of Indiana, each mile taking her further from the friends and places she loved. Her father, Robert, had secured a new job in this small, quiet town after months of unemployment, and the move was supposed to be a fresh start for the family. For Carmen, though, it felt like the end of everything she knew. The town of Ashton was a far cry from the bustling city she was used to. It was small, with old-fashioned buildings and narrow, winding streets. As they drove through the town square, Carmen couldn't help but notice the curious glances from the locals. It was clear that newcomers were a rare sight here. Their new home was a large, Victorian house on the outskirts of town. It stood at the end of a long, tree-lined driveway, surrounded by a sprawling, overgrown garden. The house had an air of faded grandeur, its once white paint now peeling and its windows dark and empty. Carmen's mother, Lisa, seemed enamored with its old-world charm, but to Carmen, it felt eerie and unwelcoming. As they stepped inside, Carmen's first impression was of the house's coldness. It was as if the very walls held the chill of countless winters. The floors creaked underfoot, and the dim lighting cast long shadows that seemed to dance across the walls. The house had been vacant for years, and it showed. Dust covered every surface, and the air was thick with the scent of mildew and age. Carmen's room was on the second floor, at the end of a long hallway. It was a small, square room with a single window that looked out over the garden. The previous occupants had left behind an old iron bed frame and a rickety wooden dresser. As Carmen began unpacking her things, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She chalked it up to her imagination, but the sensation lingered, making her skin prickle with unease. The first night in the new house was restless. Carmen lay in bed, listening to the strange sounds of the old house settling. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, and she could hear the distant hoot of an owl. She tried to sleep, but her mind kept wandering back to the unsettling feeling she had experienced earlier. Just as she was drifting off, a loud thud echoed through the house, jolting her awake. She sat up, heart pounding, straining to hear any other noises. After a few moments of silence, she convinced herself it was just the house settling and eventually fell into a fitful sleep. The next morning, Carmen's father drove her to Ashton High School. The building was a stark contrast to her old school. It was a single-story structure with faded brick walls and a small parking lot. As they pulled up, Carmen could see clusters of students milling about, chatting and laughing. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for the challenge ahead. Inside, the school was a maze of narrow hallways and identical doors. Carmen clutched her schedule, trying to navigate her way to her first class. The stares and whispers started almost immediately, making her feel like a specimen under a microscope. She kept her head down, avoiding eye contact, and hurried to her locker. During lunch, Carmen found a quiet corner in the library. She wasn't ready to face the crowded cafeteria and the inevitable stares. As she settled into a chair with a book, she felt a strange sense of déjà vu, as if she had been in this exact situation before. The feeling was unsettling, but she pushed it aside, focusing on the pages in front of her. That afternoon, as she was leaving her English class, Carmen felt a sudden chill. She glanced around and saw a shadowy figure at the end of the hallway, just for a split second before it vanished around the corner. Her heart skipped a beat, and she hurried to catch up. But when she turned the corner, the hallway was empty. Shaking her head, she told herself she was just tired and imagining things. Back at home, Carmen's parents were busy unpacking and settling into their new routines. Over dinner, they chatted about their plans for the house, oblivious to the undercurrent of unease that Carmen felt. She didn't want to worry them, so she kept her strange experiences to herself. That night, as Carmen lay in bed, she heard the thud again. This time, it was followed by a series of soft, scraping sounds, like something being dragged across the floor. She got up and crept to the top of the stairs, peering into the darkness below. The house was silent, save for the occasional creak of the floorboards. After a few tense minutes, she returned to her room, but sleep eluded her. The next few days followed a similar pattern. Carmen struggled to adjust to her new school, feeling more isolated and out of place with each passing day. The house continued to be a source of unease, with strange noises and cold spots that seemed to follow her around. She spent most of her time in her room, trying to avoid the unsettling atmosphere of the house. One evening, as she was unpacking a box of books, she noticed an odd bulge in the wallpaper near the baseboard. Intrigued, she peeled back the paper to reveal a small, leather-bound diary, yellowed with age. The cover was embossed with the name Emily, and as Carmen opened it, she felt a chill run down her spine. The diary entries were dated from the 1920s and told the story of a girl who had lived in the house with her family. Emily's words were filled with loneliness and fear, echoing Carmen's own feelings. She wrote of strange occurrences in the house, footsteps in empty rooms, whispers in the dark, and the sense of being watched. The final entry was especially chilling. "Something is here with me. I can feel it watching." As Carmen read, she felt a growing sense of dread. The experiences Emily described were eerily similar to her own. It was as if the house itself was alive, feeding off their fear and isolation. Determined to uncover the truth, Carmen decided to keep reading the diary, hoping it would provide some answers. That night, the strange noises in the house intensified. Carmen's room grew cold, and she could see her breath misting in the air. She lay in bed, heart pounding, listening to the whispers and footsteps that seemed to come from all around her. Suddenly, the temperature dropped even further, and she felt a presence in the room with her. She turned quickly, but there was nothing there, just shadows dancing on the walls. Carmen knew she had to find out more about the house and its history. The diary had opened a door to the past, and she was determined to step through it, no matter how terrifying the journey might be. Chapter 2: The Unseen Presence. Adjusting to life in Ashton High School was harder than Carmen had anticipated. Each day felt like an uphill battle against the stares and whispers that seemed to follow her everywhere. Her classmates were not overtly cruel, but their subtle exclusion stung just as much. She ate lunch alone in the library, buried herself in books, and avoided eye contact whenever possible. The isolation was suffocating, and the eerie atmosphere of her new home offered no solace. One evening, while unpacking a box of her belongings, Carmen discovered something peculiar. The wallpaper in her room had a strange bulge near the baseboard. Intrigued, she peeled it back and uncovered a small, leather-bound diary. The cover was worn and the pages yellowed with age. Inside, in neat cursive handwriting, was the name Emily. Carmen sat on her bed and began to read. The entries were dated from the 1920s and told the story of a girl who had lived in the house with her family. Emily's diary entries were filled with a sense of isolation and fear. She wrote about hearing footsteps in the empty hallways, whispers that seemed to come from the walls, and the feeling of being watched. The more Carmen read, the more she felt a chilling connection to Emily. The final entry was particularly unsettling. "Something is here with me. I can feel it watching." That night, as Carmen lay in bed, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was not alone. The room seemed to grow colder, and she could see her breath in the air. The silence was thick and oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of the house settling. Just as she was about to drift off, she heard a soft, almost imperceptible whisper. Her eyes snapped open, and she strained to hear more. The whispering continued, a low murmur that seemed to come from the walls themselves. She sat up, heart pounding, but saw nothing unusual. Over the next few days, the strange occurrences in the house became more frequent. Doors would open and close on their own. Objects would move inexplicably, and cold spots seemed to follow Carmen from room to room. She tried to talk to her parents about it, but they dismissed her concerns as part of the adjustment period. Her father, Robert, was preoccupied with his new job, and her mother, Lisa, was busy setting up the house. They didn't seem to notice the things that were happening around them. One evening, Carmen decided to explore the attic. She hoped that finding out more about the house history might help explain the strange events. The attic was a dusty, cluttered space filled with old furniture, boxes of forgotten belongings, and cobwebs. As she rummaged through the boxes, she found a collection of old photographs. Most of them were faded and yellowed with age, but one photo caught her eye. It was a picture of a young girl standing in front of the house. On the back, someone had written, Emily 1923. The discovery of the photograph deepened Carmen's sense of connection to Emily. She decided to continue reading the diary, hoping it would provide more clues. The entries detailed Emily's increasing fear and desperation. She wrote about seeing shadowy figures in the hallways and hearing a voice calling her name in the middle of the night. The final entry was the most chilling of all. I don't know how much longer I can stay here. The presence is getting stronger. I'm afraid it wants something from me." Carmen couldn't shake the feeling that Emily's fate was somehow connected to her own. She decided to visit the local library to see if she could find any information about the house and its previous occupants. The librarian, Mrs. Jenkins, was an elderly woman with a kind smile. She seemed surprised when Carmen asked about the house, but was more than willing to help. Mrs. Jenkins led Carmen to the local history section and pulled out a dusty old book. "The Ashton Chronicles," she said, handing it to Carmen. "This should have what you're looking for." Carmen thanked her and sat down at a nearby table. As she flipped through the pages, she found several references to her house. It had been built in the late 1800s by a wealthy family, the Cranes. The house had passed through several owners over the years, and each had reported strange occurrences. The most notable was the mysterious disappearance of Emily Crane in 1923. According to the book, Emily had been a bright, happy child until she started complaining about seeing ghosts. Her parents dismissed her claims, believing she was seeking attention. But as the sightings became more frequent and disturbing, Emily's mental state deteriorated. One night, she vanished without a trace. Her disappearance was never solved, and her parents eventually moved away, leaving the house to fall into disrepair. Carmen felt a chill run down her spine as she read Emily's story. The similarities between Emily's experiences and her own were too striking to ignore. She realized that the presence in the house might be Emily, or something connected to her. Determined to find out more, Carmen decided to return to the attic and search for anything that might help her understand what had happened to Emily. That night, as Carmen prepared to go to bed, the temperature in her room dropped suddenly. She pulled the covers up to her chin, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread. Just as she was about to drift off, she heard the whispering again, louder this time. It was unmistakable, a voice calling her name. She sat up, heart pounding, and saw a shadowy figure standing at the foot of her bed. She blinked and it was gone. Carmen knew she couldn't ignore the signs any longer. She had to find out what was happening in the house, and she had to do it quickly. The presence was getting stronger, and she feared it wanted something from her. She decided to confide in her history teacher, Mr. Roberts, hoping he might have some insight into the town's history and the mysterious events surrounding her house. The next day at school, Carmen approached Mr. Roberts after class. He was a tall, thin man with a friendly demeanor and a genuine passion for history. When Carmen told him about the strange occurrences and the diary, he listened intently, his expression growing more serious by the minute. "I've heard stories about that house," he said, leaning back in his chair. "It has a reputation for being haunted. Some say it's cursed. There are many theories, but no one knows for sure what's behind it. I'll see what I can find out for you." That evening, Carmen returned home with a renewed sense of purpose. She continued reading Emily's diary, hoping to find more clues. As she read, she began to piece together a picture of Emily's life and the events that had led to her disappearance. She discovered that Emily had been researching the history of the house, just as Carmen was now. Emily had found references to a Native American curse placed on the land after a violent conflict with the settlers. The curse was said to bind restless spirits to the property, preventing them from moving on. Carmen felt a growing sense of urgency. The presence in the house was becoming more intense, and she knew she had to find a way to break the curse and set the spirits free. She decided to visit the local cemetery, where many of the town's founding families were buried. She hoped to find Emily's grave and perhaps learn more about her fate. As Carmen walked through the cemetery, she felt a sense of unease. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. She found Emily's grave in a secluded corner, marked by a simple stone that read, "Emily Crane, 1910-1923. Taken too soon. May she find peace." Carmen knelt by the grave, feeling a deep connection to the girl who had lived in her house so many years ago. She whispered a promise to Emily, vowing to uncover the truth and bring peace to a restless spirit. As she stood up, she felt a cold breeze brush past her, and the whispering voice seemed to say, "Thank you." Carmen knew she was on the right path, but she also knew the journey would be fraught with danger and uncertainty. The unseen presence in the house was growing stronger, and she feared it would stop at nothing to achieve its goals. That night, back at the house, Carmen prepared herself for another restless night. She lay in bed, listening to the sounds of the old house and the whispering voices that seemed to come from the walls. She felt a chill in the air and pulled the covers up to her chin, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread. As she drifted off to sleep, she heard the soft, almost imperceptible sound of footsteps approaching her room. She sat up, heart pounding, and saw the shadowy figure standing at the foot of her bed. This time, it did not vanish. It moved closer, and Carmen could see the outline of a young girl. The figure reached out a hand, and Carmen felt a cold, clammy touch on her arm. "Help me," the figure whispered, its voice echoing in the silence. Carmen's heart raced, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling. The figure hesitated, then replied, "I am Emily. I need your help. You must find the truth and set me free." With that, the figure disappeared, leaving Carmen alone in the darkness. She knew now that Emily's spirit was trapped in the house, bound by the curse and the unresolved mystery of her death. Carmen was determined to find the truth and break the curse, no matter the cost. The next morning, Carmen met with Mr. Roberts again. Chapter 3: The History Unveiled. Carmen's nights were filled with restless sleep and haunting dreams. The figure of Emily, with her pleading eyes and cold touch, appeared almost every night. By day, Carmen immersed herself in Emily's diary, piecing together the young girl's tragic story. The more she read, the more Carmen felt Emily's fear and desperation. It was as if the very essence of Emily's spirit was imprinted on the pages, reaching out through time to Carmen. At school, Carmen struggled to focus. Her mind was constantly drawn back to the house and the mystery that enveloped it. One day, a girl named Lily, who Carmen had noticed a few times but never spoken to, approached her in the library. "You live in that old house on the edge of town, don't you?" Lily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Carmen nodded, curious. "Yeah, why?" Lily glanced around to make sure no one was listening. "My grandmother used to tell me stories about that house. She said it's haunted by the ghost of a girl who disappeared a long time ago. Everyone in town knows about it, but no one likes to talk about it. Be careful, okay? Be careful, okay?" Before Carmen could ask more, Lily hurried off, leaving her with a sense of unease. That evening, Carmen decided to dig deeper into the house's history. She returned to the local library, hoping to find more information about Emily and the Crane family. Mrs. Jenkins, the librarian, greeted her with a warm smile. "Back again, dear. What can I help you with today?" "I want to know more about the Crane family and what happened to Emily," Carmen replied. Mrs. Jenkins nodded and led Carmen to the archives section. "There are old newspapers and town records here. You might find what you're looking for." Carmen spent hours poring over the dusty volumes and fragile newspapers. She discovered that the Crane family had been prominent members of the community, known for their wealth and influence. But their story took a dark turn when Emily began seeing ghosts and experiencing strange occurrences in the house. One article from 1923 caught Carmen's attention. It detailed Emily's disappearance and the frantic search that followed. Despite extensive efforts, Emily was never found, and the town was left with more questions than answers. There were whispers of foul play, but no evidence ever surfaced. As Carmen read, she found references to a local legend about a Native American curse placed on the land. According to the legend, the settlers had angered the native tribe by desecrating sacred ground, and the curse bound restless spirits to the property. The more Carmen uncovered, the more she felt the weight of the house's dark history pressing down on her. Back at home, Carmen's nightmares grew more vivid. She dreamed of running through dark, endless hallways, chased by an unseen force. The whispering voices grew louder, and she often woke up drenched in sweat, her heart racing. The house seemed to come alive at night, with shadows moving in the corners of her vision and cold spots that sent shivers down her spine. One night, Carmen was jolted awake by a loud banging noise. She sat up, listening intently. The noise seemed to be coming from the attic. Gathering her courage, she grabbed a flashlight and headed upstairs. The air grew colder as she climbed, and the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. In the attic, Carmen followed the sound to a far corner where she found an old, locked trunk. The banging had stopped, but she could feel a presence nearby, watching her. Her hands trembled as she fumbled with the lock. After several tense minutes, she managed to pry it open. Inside the trunk, Carmen found a collection of old photographs, letters, and personal items. One photograph caught her eye. It was of Emily standing with a young man, both of them smiling. The back of the photograph had a date and a name: Emily and Thomas, 1922. Carmen's heart raced as she sifted through the letters. They were love letters between Emily and Thomas, filled with dreams of a future together. But the tone of the letters changed as the dates grew closer to Emily's disappearance. Emily wrote of her fear of the house, of the shadows that seemed to follow her, and of a sense of impending doom. Among the letters, Carmen found a small leather-bound book. It was Emily's journal, separate from the diary she had already found. The entries in the journal were filled with terror and confusion. Emily wrote about the ghostly apparitions, the cold spots, and the feeling of being watched. Her final entry sent chills down Carmen's spine. "I know now what it wants. It wants me. If anyone finds this, please help me." Carmen knew she had to talk to Mr. Roberts again. She needed more information about the curse and how to break it. The next day at school, she approached him after class. "Mr. Roberts, I found more about Emily and the house," she said, showing him the letters and journal. Mr. Roberts' expression grew serious as he read through the documents. "This is troubling, Carmen. The curse you're dealing with is not something to be taken lightly. The spirits bound to the house are restless, and it seems Emily's spirit is one of them." "How do I break the curse?" Carmen asked, desperation in her voice. Mr. Roberts sighed. "Curses like these are deeply rooted in history and tradition. You'll need to perform a ritual to release the spirits. I'll help you find the details, but it won't be easy." That evening, Carmen returned home with a mix of hope and fear. She knew breaking the curse was her only chance to find peace for Emily and herself. She continued to read Emily's diary and journal, looking for any clues that might help. As she read, she found references to a hidden room in the basement where Emily believed the source of the curse might be. Determined to find it, Carmen grabbed a flashlight and headed to the basement. The air grew colder as she descended, and the darkness seemed to close in around her. In the basement, Carmen searched for any signs of a hidden room. She tapped on the walls, listening for hollow sounds. After what felt like hours, she found a section of the wall that sounded different. She pushed against it, and to her surprise, it swung open, revealing a small, hidden room. The room was filled with old relics and artifacts. Carmen saw symbols carved into the walls and objects that looked like they had been used in rituals. In the center of the room was a large, ancient-looking book. She opened it and saw that it was filled with handwritten spells and incantations. Carmen's heart raced as she realized she had found the key to breaking the curse. She knew she couldn't do it alone, so she decided to enlist the help of her few friends at school. She called Lily and explained everything, hoping she would believe her. To Carmen's relief, Lily agreed to help. "I've always believed in the stories about that house," Lily said. "I'll do whatever I can to help you." The next day, Carmen, Lily, and a couple of other friends gathered in the basement. They studied the ancient book and prepared for the ritual. The instructions were detailed and complex, involving specific symbols, chants, and the use of certain objects. As they began the ritual, the air grew colder, and the whispering voices became louder. Shadows danced on the walls, and Carmen felt a sense of impending danger. She pressed on, chanting the words from the book and performing the necessary actions. Suddenly, a powerful force knocked them all to the ground. The room grew unbearably cold, and they could see their breath in the air. The shadowy figure of Emily appeared, her eyes filled with fear and desperation. "Help me," Emily's voice echoed in the small room. "We're trying," Carmen replied, her voice trembling. "We just need to finish the ritual." With renewed determination, Carmen and her friends continued the ritual. The shadowy figure of Emily seemed to grow more solid, and the room filled with a blinding light. The force that had knocked them down dissipated, and the air grew warmer. As the light faded, Carmen saw Emily standing before her, looking more at peace than ever before. "Thank you," Emily whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. "You've set me free." With that, Emily's figure dissolved into the light, leaving Carmen and her friends in the now calm and quiet room. The presence that had haunted the house was gone, and Carmen felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt since moving in. The next day, Carmen met with Mr. Roberts again and told him what had happened. He listened intently, nodding as she spoke. "You've done something incredible, Carmen. You've broken the curse and freed the spirits bound to the house." Carmen smiled, feeling a sense of accomplishment and relief. "I couldn't have done it without your help and the help of my friends." As the days passed, Carmen noticed a change in the house. The cold spots were gone, the strange noises had ceased, and the oppressive atmosphere had lifted. She finally felt at home in the old Victorian house, knowing she had brought peace to Emily and the other restless spirits. She continued to adjust to her new life in Ashton, finding solace in her newfound friends and the knowledge that she had made a difference. The house that had once been a source of fear and unease was now a place of comfort and peace, a testament to the power of determination and the strength of the human spirit. Chapter 4. The Descent. Carmen's nights grew increasingly troubled. Her dreams, once merely disturbing, became vividly nightmarish. She found herself trapped in endless hallways, running from an unseen force, the whispers growing louder and more insistent. The house seemed to pulse with a dark energy, its very walls imbued with an ominous presence. During the day, Carmen struggled to focus on her schoolwork. The lines between her dreams and reality began to blur. She would catch glimpses of shadowy figures out of the corner of her eye, only to find nothing there when she turned to look. The temperature in the house fluctuated wildly, plunging to icy depths without warning. One afternoon, Carmen found herself inexplicably drawn to the local cemetery. The sky was overcast, casting a dull gray light over the town. As she walked among the ancient tombstones, she felt a strange sense of calm. She wandered through the rows, her fingers trailing over the weathered stone markers, until she found herself standing before a grave marked Sarah Williams, 1905 to 1923. The epitaph read, "Taken too soon, may she find peace." Carmen knelt beside the grave, feeling an overwhelming sense of connection to the girl buried there. She whispered a silent prayer for Sarah, vowing to uncover the truth and bring peace to the restless spirits that haunted her home. Back at the house, the paranormal events continued to escalate. Carmen's room seemed to be the epicenter of the activity. Objects moved on their own, doors slammed shut with no apparent cause, and she often awoke to find her furniture rearranged. The diary and journal she had found were now her constant companions, their pages filled with Emily's terror and confusion. One night, during a particularly violent thunderstorm, Carmen was thrown from her bed by an unseen force. She scrambled to her feet, heart pounding, and ran to the basement, where she had previously discovered the hidden room. The air grew colder with each step, and the sense of dread intensified. In the hidden room, Carmen found herself surrounded by the relics and artifacts she had uncovered earlier. The symbols carved into the walls seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. She felt a presence behind her and turned to see the ghostly figure of a young girl, Emily. Her eyes were filled with sorrow and desperation. "Help me!" Emily's voice was barely a whisper, but it echoed in the small room. "I'm trying," Carmen replied, her voice trembling. "I just need to know how." Emily pointed to a corner of the room where a small, dusty chest sat. Carmen approached it cautiously, her hands shaking as she lifted the lid. Inside, she found an old photograph album. The pictures were of Emily and her family, as well as the house and its surroundings. One photo in particular caught Carmen's eye. It was of Emily standing beside a young boy, both of them smiling. On the back, someone had written, "Emily and Thomas, 1922. Carmen's heart raced as she realized the significance of the photograph. She had found references to Thomas in Emily's journal, but this was the first tangible evidence of his existence. She knew she needed to find out more about him and his connection to Emily's disappearance. The next day, Carmen visited the local library once again. Mrs. Jenkins greeted her with a warm smile. "Back again, dear. What can I help you with today?" "I need to find out more about a boy named Thomas who knew Emily Crane," Carmen replied. Mrs. Jenkins nodded and led Carmen to the archives section. "There are old school records and town registers here. You might find what you're looking for." Carmen spent hours sifting through the dusty volumes and fragile documents. She discovered that Thomas had been a friend of Emily's, and the two had been inseparable. Thomas had lived in a small house on the edge of town with his family. Tragically, Thomas had died in a drowning accident at the nearby pond just a few months before Emily's disappearance. The loss had devastated Emily, and she had become increasingly withdrawn and fearful after his death. Armed with this new information, Carmen returned home. She decided to visit the pond where Thomas had drowned, hoping to find some clue that might help her understand what had happened. As she approached the water's edge, she felt a chill run down her spine. The pond was still and silent, its surface reflecting the darkening sky. Carmen knelt by the water, her fingers brushing the cool surface. She closed her eyes and tried to imagine what Emily must have felt, losing her best friend and facing the growing terror in her own home. Suddenly, she felt a cold, clammy hand grab her wrist. She gasped and opened her eyes to see the ghostly figure of Thomas standing beside her. "Please." Thomas's voice was a faint echo. "Help her. She needs you." Carmen nodded, her heart pounding. "I will. I promise." As she stood up, the figure of Thomas faded away, leaving Carmen alone by the water. She knew she had to return to the hidden room in the basement and continue her search for answers. That night, she gathered her courage and descended into the dark, cold basement once more. In the hidden room, Carmen studied the symbols carved into the walls. She realized they were part of a ritual meant to bind spirits to the house. She needed to find a way to break the ritual and set the spirits free. She searched through the old book of spells and incantations she had found earlier, looking for anything that might help. After hours of searching, she found a passage that described a ritual for releasing bound spirits. It required several specific items: a white candle, a piece of the spirit's personal belongings, and a bowl of water from the pond where Thomas had drowned. Carmen gathered the items and prepared herself for the ritual. As she began the ritual, the air in the room grew colder, and the whispering voices became louder. She lit the white candle and placed it in the center of the room. She took the photograph of Emily and Thomas and placed it beside the candle. Finally, she poured the bowl of water from the pond into a small dish. Carmen closed her eyes and began to chant the incantation from the book. The shadows in the room seemed to grow darker, and she could feel the presence of the spirits all around her. She focused on her connection to Emily and Thomas, pouring all her energy into the ritual. Suddenly, a powerful force knocked her to the ground. The candle was extinguished, and the room was plunged into darkness. Carmen felt a surge of fear but forced herself to stay calm. She continued to chant, her voice steady and determined. The air grew warmer, and she could see a faint light growing in the center of the room. The shadows began to recede, and the whispering voices faded away. The figures of Emily and Thomas appeared before her, their faces filled with gratitude. "Thank you." Emily's voice was a soft echo. "You've set us free," Thomas added, his figure shimmering in the dim light. Carmen felt a sense of relief and accomplishment. She had broken the curse and set the spirits free. The oppressive atmosphere that had haunted the house was gone, replaced by a sense of peace and tranquility. The next day, Carmen met with Mr. Roberts and told him what had happened. He listened intently, nodding as she spoke. "You've done something incredible, Carmen. You've broken the curse and freed the spirits bound to the house." Carmen smiled, feeling a sense of accomplishment and relief. "I couldn't have done it without your help and the help of my friends." As the days passed, Carmen noticed a change in the house. The cold spots were gone, the strange noises had ceased, and the oppressive atmosphere had lifted. She finally felt at home in the old Victorian house, knowing she had brought peace to Emily and the other restless spirit. She continued to adjust to her new life in Ashton, finding solace in her newfound friends and the knowledge that she had made a difference. The house that had once been a source of fear and unease was now a place of comfort and peace, a testament to the power of determination and the strength of the human spirit. Chapter 5. The Haunting. The relief Carmen felt after freeing Emily and Thomas was profound, but it was short-lived. Though the house atmosphere lightened somewhat, it quickly became clear that not all spirits had found peace. The eerie phenomena began again, more intense and menacing than before. Carmen knew there was more to uncover and more spirits to help. One morning, as she was getting ready for school, Carmen's mirror fogged over with frost, despite the warm weather. She wiped it clear with a shiver, but the moment her hand left the glass, letters began to appear, written by an unseen hand. The message was clear and chilling. "Help me." Carmen's heart pounded as she stared at the words. She knew she couldn't face this alone, so she decided to confide in Mr. Roberts again. After school, she approached him, hoping he could provide more insight. "Mr. Roberts," she began, trying to keep her voice steady, "the hauntings haven't stopped. There's still something or someone trapped in the house. I need your help." Mr. Roberts looked concerned, but not surprised. "Carmen, the history of your house is deeply rooted in this town's past. If there are still spirits there, it means there's unresolved business. Let's look deeper into the town's records. There might be more to this than we initially thought." Together, they delved into the town's archives, uncovering old maps, records, and personal diaries of former residents. They found references to a series of disappearances and mysterious deaths in the late 1800s and early 1900s, all connected to Carmen's house. The most disturbing revelation was that these incidents were often covered up or dismissed by the town authorities, hinting at a deeper, darker secret. Carmen and Mr. Roberts also learned about a reclusive historian named Mrs. Perkins, who lived on the outskirts of town. She was known for her extensive knowledge of Ashton's history and its more sinister aspects. They decided to pay her a visit, hoping she could shed light on the hauntings. Mrs. Perkins lived in a quaint, old cottage filled with books and artifacts. She was a petite, elderly woman with sharp eyes that seemed to see right through people. She welcomed them in and listened attentively as Carmen recounted her experiences. "I've been expecting someone from that house," Mrs. Perkins said finally. "The spirits there have been restless for generations. The land your house is built on has a dark history. It was once a site of conflict between the early settlers and the native tribes. Many lives were lost, and the ground was cursed." Carmen felt a chill run down her spine. "Is there any way to break the curse and help the spirits find peace?" Mrs. Perkins nodded. "There is a way, but it's not easy. The curse binds the spirits to the land, but it can be broken by understanding their stories and fulfilling their unfinished business. You'll need to perform a ritual to cleanse the house and the land. I can guide you, but you'll need to be brave and persistent." Mrs. Perkins provided them with an ancient book of rituals and detailed instructions on what they needed to do. The ritual required specific herbs, candles, and personal items belonging to the spirits. Carmen felt overwhelmed but determined to see it through. Back at home, the paranormal activity continued to escalate. One evening, during a fierce thunderstorm, the power went out, plunging the house into darkness. Carmen fumbled for her flashlight and made her way to the basement, where she kept the items for the ritual. As she descended the stairs, she felt a cold, clammy hand grasp her ankle. She screamed and stumbled, dropping the flashlight. In the pitch-black darkness, she could hear whispering voices and feel the presence of multiple spirits. Gathering her courage, she picked up the flashlight and shone it around the room. The beam illuminated several ghostly figures, their faces twisted in agony. Carmen took a deep breath and addressed the spirits. "I'm here to help you. Please, tell me what you need." One spirit, a young woman, stepped forward. Her eyes were hollow, and her expression was one of despair. "We are trapped," she said, her voice a mournful wail. "We cannot move on until the truth is revealed." "Tell me what happened," Carmen urged. "I need to know so I can help you." The young woman began to recount her story. She was Sarah, one of the many victims of the conflicts and tragedies that had plagued the land. She and others had been wronged, their lives cut short by violence and betrayal. Their spirits were bound to the house, unable to find peace until justice was served. Determined to uncover the truth, Carmen spent the next few days researching the history of the house and the land. She uncovered more stories of violence, betrayal, and cover-ups. The town's founding families had been involved in numerous shady dealings, and many of the spirits bound to the house were their victims. With this new information, Carmen prepared for the ritual. She gathered the necessary herbs and candles and collected personal items connected to the spirits. She felt a sense of dread, but knew she had to see it through. On the night of the ritual, Carmen, her parents, and a few trusted friends gathered in the basement. The air was thick with tension, and the atmosphere was heavy with the presence of the spirits. Carmen lit the candles and arranged the herbs as Mrs. Perkins had instructed. She then placed the personal items in the center of the circle they had formed. Carmen began to chant the incantation from the ancient book. The air grew colder, and the whispering voices grew louder. The shadows in the room seemed to close in around them, and the candle flames flickered wildly. As the ritual progressed, the spirits began to materialize. They were no longer the terrifying apparitions Carmen had seen before. Instead, they appeared as they had in life, their faces filled with hope and longing. The young woman, Sarah, stepped forward once again. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. "You have uncovered the truth and given us a chance to find peace." Carmen continued the ritual, feeling the weight of the spirits' anguish and the power of the ancient curse. As she reached the final incantation, the air grew warm, and the whispering voices ceased. The spirits began to fade, their expressions peaceful and content. The room filled with a bright, blinding light, and Carmen felt a surge of energy pass through her. When the light faded, the spirits were gone, and the oppressive atmosphere that had haunted the house for so long had lifted. Carmen felt a sense of relief and accomplishment. She had broken the curse and freed the spirits bound to the house. The house, once a place of fear and unease, was now a sanctuary of peace and tranquility. The next day, Carmen met with Mr. Roberts and Mrs. Perkins to tell them what had happened. They listened intently, nodding as she spoke. "You've done something incredible, Carmen," Mr. Roberts said. "You've uncovered the truth and brought peace to those who were wronged. You've made a real difference." Mrs. Perkins smiled. "The spirits are finally at rest thanks to you. The house and the land are no longer cursed. You've given them the peace they've sought for so long." As the days passed, Carmen noticed a change in the house. The cold spots were gone, the strange noises had ceased, and the oppressive atmosphere had lifted. She finally felt at home in the old Victorian house, knowing she had brought peace to the spirits that had haunted it for so long. She continued to adjust to her new life in Ashton, finding solace in her newfound friends and the knowledge that she had made a difference. The house that had once been a source of fear and unease was now a place of comfort and peace, a testament to the power of determination and the strength of the human spirit. Chapter 6. The Confrontation. The calm after the ritual was a welcome respite for Carmen, but she knew deep down that her task was not yet complete. The house, despite its newfound tranquility, still held secrets. The presence that Carmen had felt in the attic and the basement seemed quieter, but not entirely gone. She had to delve deeper to uncover the remaining mysteries and confront the forces that still lingered. One evening, while Carmen was studying in her room, she heard a faint scratching noise coming from the walls. She had hoped that the ritual would have put an end to such disturbances, but it seemed something still demanded her attention. She followed the noise to the attic, where the air grew colder with each step. In the attic, Carmen found the source of the scratching, a hidden panel behind a stack of old boxes. She pushed the boxes aside and pried the panel open, revealing a small, dusty space. Inside, she discovered a collection of old, tattered documents and a few personal items that looked like they had been untouched for decades. Among the documents was a letter addressed to Emily Crane. It was from Thomas, dated shortly before his death. As Carmen read the letter, she realized it contained a confession. Thomas wrote about his involvement in a terrible accident that had led to the death of a young girl named Sarah Williams. He expressed his deep regret and begged Emily for forgiveness, fearing that his actions had cursed the land and the house. Carmen's heart pounded as she read the letter. This was the key to understanding the lingering unrest. Thomas's guilt and the unresolved tragedy had left a stain on the house, binding the spirits and fueling the paranormal activity. Carmen knew she had to confront Thomas's spirit and help him find peace. Determined to resolve the situation, Carmen enlisted the help of her friends, Lily and Jake, who had supported her during the previous rituals. They gathered in the basement, where the atmosphere was thick with tension. Carmen explained what she had found and what needed to be done. "We need to confront Thomas's spirit and help him find forgiveness," Carmen said. "Only then can we truly free the house from its past." Lily and Jake nodded, their faces set with determination. They lit the candles and arranged the herbs as Mrs. Perkins had taught them. Carmen held the letter in her hand, ready to summon Thomas's spirit. As they began the ritual, the air grew colder, and the shadows in the room deepened. Carmen chanted the incantation, her voice steady despite the growing sense of dread. The room seemed to close in around them, and the candle flames flickered wildly. Suddenly, the temperature dropped further, and a ghostly figure appeared before them. It was Thomas, his face a mask of anguish and regret. His eyes were filled with sorrow as he looked at Carmen, Lily, and Jake. Why have you summoned me?" Thomas's voice was a low, mournful wail. "We found your letter," Carmen said, holding it out to him. "We know what happened, and we want to help you find peace." Thomas reached for the letter, his ghostly hand trembling. He read it, his expression softening as he did. "I never meant for any of this to happen," he whispered. "I was young and foolish, and my actions caused so much pain." Carmen stepped forward, her voice gentle. "Thomas, you need to forgive yourself. Emily and Sarah have found peace, and you can too. But you must let go of your guilt and move on." Tears streamed down Thomas's ghostly face as he looked at Carmen. "I don't know how," he said, his voice breaking. "We'll help you," Carmen said firmly. "We'll perform a ritual to help you find forgiveness and release you from this place." They began the ritual, chanting the incantation for forgiveness and release. The air grew warmer, and the oppressive atmosphere began to lift. Thomas's figure started to glow with a soft, golden light, and his expression transformed from one of sorrow to one of peace. As the ritual reached its climax, the light enveloped Thomas, and his form began to fade. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you for freeing me." With that, Thomas's spirit disappeared, leaving behind a sense of calm and serenity. The room felt lighter, and the air was filled with a sense of relief. Carmen, Lily, and Jake sat in silence for a moment, absorbing what had just happened. The next day, Carmen felt a renewed sense of peace in the house. The oppressive atmosphere was gone, replaced by a feeling of warmth and tranquility. She knew that the house was finally free from the lingering spirits and the dark history that had plagued it for so long. Carmen met with Mr. Roberts and Mrs. Perkins to share what had happened. They listened intently, nodding as she spoke. "You've done something truly remarkable, Carmen," Mr. Roberts said. "You've not only freed the spirits, but also helped to heal the wounds of the past. This town owes you a debt of gratitude." Mrs. Perkins smiled warmly. "The spirits are finally at rest, and the curse has been lifted. You've brought peace to the house and to those who were wrong." As the days passed, Carmen felt more at home in Ashton. She continued to adjust to her new life, finding solace in her newfound friends and the knowledge that she had made a difference. The house that had once been a source of fear and unease was now a place of comfort and peace, a testament to the power of determination and the strength of the human spirit. Carmen knew that she had faced her fears and emerged stronger for it. She had uncovered the truth, confronted the lingering spirits, and brought peace to those who had been wrong. The journey had been difficult and terrifying, but it had also been transformative. Carmen had found her place in Ashton, and in the old Victorian house, knowing that she had helped to heal the past and create a brighter future. Chapter 7. The Investigation. With the curse seemingly lifted and the spirits of Emily, Thomas, and Sarah at peace, Carmen hoped her life in Ashton would finally settle into a semblance of normalcy. However, the relief was fleeting. The house, while less oppressive, still felt unsettled. Carmen couldn't shake the feeling that something remained unresolved. Determined to bring complete peace to her home, she decided to delve deeper into the town's history, particularly the dark secrets that connected it to her house. Carmen enlisted the help of her trusted friends, Lily and Jake. The trio had become close through their shared experiences, and their bond had strengthened through the trials they had faced. Together, they formed a plan to investigate the town's history more thoroughly, starting with the local library and its archive. Their first stop was the library, where Mrs. Jenkins greeted them warmly. "Back for more research, I see," she said, her eyes twinkling with curiosity. "What can I help you with today?" Carmen explained their mission, detailing the lingering sense of unrest in the house and their desire to uncover any remaining secrets. Mrs. Jenkins nodded thoughtfully. "There's a section of the archives that hasn't been touched in years. It contains records and documents from the town's early days. You might find something useful there." She led them to a dusty, dimly lit corner of the library where old books and documents were stored. The air was thick with the scent of aged paper and history. Carmen, Lily, and Jake began to sift through the records, looking for anything that might shed light on the lingering presence in the house. As they dug through the documents, they found records of land disputes, conflicts with the native tribes, and accounts of mysterious disappearances. One particular document caught Carmen's eye, a ledger detailing the transactions of the town's founding families. The ledger contained a list of names and dates, along with cryptic notes about certain individuals. "Look at this," Carmen said, pointing to a series of entries marked with a symbol resembling a broken arrow. "These entries all have the same symbol. It must mean something." Lily examined the ledger closely. "It looks like these are records of payments or debts. But what does the symbol mean?" Jake, who had been studying a map of the town, looked up. "I think I might know. The broken arrow is a symbol used by the native tribes to signify broken promises or treaties. These transactions could be linked to the land disputes and the curse." Their research led them to the conclusion that the founding families had indeed broken a treaty with the native tribes, desecrating sacred land to expand the town. This betrayal had likely led to the curse that bound the spirits to the house and the land. Determined to learn more, they decided to visit the local historical society. The society was housed in an old building near the center of town, filled with artifacts, photographs, and records from Ashton's past. The curator, Mr. Thompson, was a grizzled old man with a wealth of knowledge about the town's history. When Carmen explained their quest, Mr. Thompson's eyes narrowed. "You are digging into some dark parts of our history, young lady. The founding families were not the saints they're often portrayed as. They did what they had to do to establish the town, but not all of it was honorable." Mr. Thompson led them to a back room filled with more records and artifacts. He pulled out a large, dusty book and opened it to a page marked with the same broken arrow symbol. The page detailed a secret agreement between the town's leaders and a powerful family named the Harpers. The Harpers had orchestrated the desecration of the sacred land and covered up the resulting violence and deaths. "Look here," Mr. Thompson pointed to a passage in the book. "The Harpers were the ones who led the charge to expand the town onto the sacred land. They paid off the other families and silenced anyone who opposed them. The curse is their doing." Carmen, Lily, and Jake exchanged determined looks. They knew they had to confront the Harpers and uncover the full truth to finally break the curse and bring peace to the house. Their next step was to visit the Harper family estate, a grand mansion on the outskirts of town. The estate was an imposing structure, surrounded by tall iron gates and meticulously maintained gardens. Carmen felt a sense of foreboding as they approached the gate. She pressed the intercom button and a stern voice crackled through the speaker. "State your business." "We need to speak with someone about the town's history," Carmen said, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's urgent." After a tense pause, the gate slowly creaked open, and they were allowed inside. A butler greeted them at the door and led them to a large, dimly lit study where an elderly woman sat behind a massive oak desk. Her eyes were sharp and piercing, and she regarded them with suspicion. "I am Eleanor Harper," she said, her voice cold. "What do you want?" Carmen explained their investigation, detailing the discoveries they had made and the lingering unrest in her house. Eleanor listened in silence, her expression unreadable. When Carmen finished, Eleanor sighed heavily. "You are not the first to come seeking answers," she said. "My family's past is stained with blood and betrayal. The curse is real, and it is our burden to bear. But I can tell you this, the only way to break the curse is to perform a ritual of atonement. You must acknowledge the wrongs done and seek forgiveness from the spirits of those who were wronged." Eleanor provided them with a scroll containing the details of the ritual. It was complex and required a number of rare items, including a piece of the original treaty that had been broken and a token of atonement from each of the founding families. Chapter 8. The Resolution. The journey Carmen had undertaken was more than she had ever imagined. With the ritual successfully performed and the spirits seemingly at peace, Carmen felt a profound sense of accomplishment. However, she also sensed that the story wasn't quite finished. There was one final piece to the puzzle that had eluded her, and she knew it lay in the local cemetery. As the summer days lengthened, Carmen spent more time exploring Ashton, growing closer to Lily and Jake. The three friends had become inseparable, their bond solidified by the extraordinary experiences they had shared. But Carmen couldn't shake the feeling that her work wasn't done. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned a deep shade of twilight, Carmen felt an irresistible pull to the cemetery. She called Lily and Jake, who agreed to meet her there. They arrived just as darkness fell, the cemetery bathed in the eerie glow of moonlight. The three friends walked among the graves in silence, the cool night air filled with the scent of damp earth and old leaves. Carmen led them to Sarah Williams' grave, the same one she had visited before. As she knelt by the tombstone, a sense of calm washed over her. "I feel like there's something here," Carmen said softly. "Something we haven't discovered yet." Lily and Jake nodded, their expressions serious. They trusted Carmen's instincts and knew better than to question her now. They began to search the area, looking for any signs or symbols that might reveal a hidden secret. As they searched, Carmen noticed a faint, glowing light emanating from the base of Sarah's tombstone. She reached out and touched it, feeling a strange warmth spread through her fingers. The light intensified, and the ground beneath the tombstone began to shift deep. With a gasp, Carmen realized that the tombstone was actually a hidden entrance. "Help me lift this," Carmen said, her voice trembling with excitement. Together, they pushed the tombstone aside, revealing a narrow stone staircase leading down into the earth. The air that wafted up from the staircase was cold and musty, and the faint glow illuminated the path below. "Do we go down?" Jake asked, his voice tinged with both fear and curiosity. "We have to," Carmen replied, steeling herself. "This is the final piece of the puzzle." They descended the staircase, their footsteps echoing off the stone walls. The glow grew brighter as they went deeper, guiding them through the darkness. At the bottom, they found themselves in a small underground chamber. The walls were lined with ancient weathered stones, and in the center of the room stood an ornate stone altar. On the altar lay a large, intricately carved box. Carmen approached it cautiously, feeling a mix of anticipation and trepidation. She carefully opened the box, revealing its contents, a collection of old, fragile documents and a single, small gold locket. Carmen picked up the locket, her fingers trembling. She opened it to find a tiny portrait of Sarah Williams on one side and an inscription on the other. "To my dearest Sarah, may you find peace." "This must have belonged to Sarah," Carmen said, her voice barely above a whisper. It was probably a gift from someone she loved. As she held the locket, the glow in the room intensified, and the figure of Sarah Williams appeared before them. Her ghostly form was translucent, and her eyes were filled with sadness. "Thank you." Sarah's voice was a soft echo. "You have found what was lost. My spirit can finally rest." Carmen felt tears welling up in her eyes. "We're glad we could help, Sarah. Is there anything else we need to do?" Sarah shook her head. "No, you have done more than enough. The curse is lifted and the spirits are at peace. Thank you for giving us the closure we needed." With that, Sarah's form began to fade, and the glow in the room dimmed. The chamber felt warmer and more inviting, as if the very air had been cleansed. Carmen, Lily, and Jake stood in silence, absorbing the profound sense of peace that filled the space. As they climbed back up the staircase and replaced the tombstone, Carmen felt a sense of finality. The journey she had embarked on months ago had reached its conclusion. The spirits were at rest, and the curse was broken. In the following days, Carmen noticed a significant change in the house. The cold spots were gone, and the oppressive atmosphere had lifted completely. The house felt warm and welcoming, a true home at last. Carmen's parents, Robert and Lisa, commented on how much more comfortable and peaceful the house seemed, though they never fully understood the extent of what had transpired. Carmen also felt a change within herself. She was more confident and sure of her place in Ashton. She had faced her fears and uncovered the truth, and in doing so, she had found a new sense of purpose. Her bond with Lily and Jake deepened, and the three friends continued to support and rely on each other. One afternoon, as they sat on the porch of Carmen's house, enjoying the summer sun, Carmen reflected on everything that had happened. "I can't believe how much we've been through," she said, a smile playing on her lip. "It feels like a lifetime ago that I moved here and felt so out of place." "You've come a long way, Carmen," Lily said, squeezing her hand. "And you've made a real difference. This town and this house are better because of you." Jake nodded in agreement. "You've shown us what it means to be brave and determined. We're proud to be your friends." Carmen felt a swell of gratitude and contentment. She knew that, while the journey had been difficult and often terrifying, it had also been transformative. She had found her place in Ashton, not just as a resident, but as someone who had made a lasting impact. As the days turned into weeks and the summer drew to a close, Carmen settled into her life in Ashton with a sense of peace and fulfillment. She continued to explore the town's history, sharing her discoveries with her friends and the community. The house, once a source of fear and unease, had become a place of comfort and warmth, a testament to the power of determination and the strength of the human spirit. Carmen knew that she would always carry the memories of her journey with her, but she also knew that she had found her home. The spirits were at peace, and so was she. The old Victorian house, with its dark history and haunting secrets, had been transformed into a sanctuary of light and hope. And as she looked out over the town she had come to love, Carmen felt a profound sense of gratitude. She had faced the darkness and emerged stronger for it, and she knew that, no matter what the future held, she was ready to face it with courage and determination. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had also been beautiful and rewarding. And as she sat with her friends, surrounded by the warmth of the summer sun and the love of those she held dear, Carmen knew that she was exactly where she was meant to be.